Verbs. Verbs are doing words or actions. You cannot create a sentence without a verb, so knowing how they work is vital. You must know the important questions to ask yourself as you create verbs in French. We will look at the whole process in this presentation. What is the perfect tense? Perfect tense verbs, le passé composé, describe an action that happened in the past. It is called a perfect tense because the action started and finished in the past, so it was a complete or perfect action. Examples in English are: I watched a film. I ate a burger. I went to a party. I ran a marathon. I was sick after doing all that. French verbs, perfect tense. What does this tense mean? Who is doing the verb? Which part of avoir do I need? What do I need to do to the infinitive of the verb? What is the correct ending that needs to be added? And what are the main irregular verbs? Our aims today are to learn how to recognise regular and irregular perfect tense verbs, and to learn how to form regular and irregular perfect tense verbs. Think of this analogy. Verbs are like flowers. They have a head and a stem. Regarder, finir, répondre. All have a head, er, ir, re. Most verbs fall into the er category, but it's important to know the other two as well, as these do come up. Verbs are like flowers. When you chop off the head, all you're left with is a stem. Let's see the process. Chop off the head, chop chop, then you're left with the stem. Now you add the correct ending to make the verb. The key ingredients of le passé composé, the perfect tense, in French are as follows. Firstly, you need a subject pronoun. This is the person doing the verb. Je, tu, il, elle, on, nous, vous, il, elle. These will form part of the auxiliary verb, which in this case is avoir, the verb to have. Finally, you need a past participle. Regarder, fini, répondu. These are examples of past participles and would mean things like watched, finished, answered. So think of the past participle as the ed form of the verb in English. Step 1. Choose the appropriate form of the verb avoir, the auxiliary verb. Down the left-hand side you have the English, and down the right-hand side the French. J'ai, I have. Tu as, you have. Il, elle, on a. He has and she has and we informal have. Nous avons, we have. Vous avez, you have in the plural sense. Ils, elles, ont, they have. Notice how you do pronounce the S in this situation where you haven't in other examples because of the next word beginning with a vowel. Ils ont, elles ont. Step 2. Find the infinitive of the verb and chop off the ending. Regarder, finir, répondre. Chop, chop, chop. See, the infinitives now have the ending missing and all you're left with is the stem. Thirdly, you add the correct ending to make the past participle. Remember, this is the ed form of the verb in English. The great thing is that there is only one ending for all people. It is only the form of avoir that changes at the start, which means you know who's doing the verb. So for er verbs like regarder, you would have an E with an acute accent. IR verbs like finir, you just have an I. And RE verbs like répondre, you just have a U. Then the form of avoir would go before these past participles. Now you'll see a demonstration of how to apply this knowledge in some examples. When creating verbs yourself, you can either use a paper dictionary, a book, or an online dictionary like wordreference.com. Now, here we see I have an aide-mémoire on the left, which shows me the steps I need to go through to create the perfect tense. And on the right I have 5 verbs I need to translate. First one I want to do is I worked. I worked. So firstly, I need the correct form of the verb avoir, which if we look on the left-hand side is j'ai. Next, we need the verb to work. When I look up the word work in a dictionary, it will give me the noun, as in someone has done some good work. And it will also give me the verb. Obviously I need the verb, so I'll write that down now. But I must chop the ending off, so I get rid of the ER. Now to create an accent when writing a word, I press Ctrl at, release it and press the E. And then as you can see an acute accent appears. Next one, she smoked. Now again, when I look up smoke, I will see the noun, the smoke that you will see in the air, but also the verb, the act of smoking. First I'll need elle for she, and then a to say she has, as per avoir. And then the verb to smoke, which when I look it up is fumer. And just with the last example, take off the ending and add the E with an accent. We checked. Firstly, the part of avoir, nous avons, followed by the verb to check, which in French is vérifier. Obviously, we follow the same pattern as it's an ER verb. We'll chop off the ER and we control at, release, and then the E. The other way of doing this, if this shortcut doesn't work, is go to insert symbol across the top, which will allow you to insert the symbol that you wish to put in there, for example an E with an accent. Fourthly, they, and they are boys or a group of girls with at least one male member, punished. So firstly we need the form of avoir, ils ont. Then the verb to punish, so we look it up and we'll find punir. Now just with ER we chop off the IR ending, and then we put the correct ending on for IR verbs, which is just an I. Ils ont puni. Finally, you singular melted. So you singular is to a. Then we find the verb to melt, which is fondre. Now, checking on our aide-mémoire here, we see RE verbs end in a U for the past participle, as in melt to melted. And as we can see, now we have our 5 correct verbs. Now look at the following examples and conjugate verbs by following the patterns. Remember the 3 important steps I've just been through. Pause the video to complete each task before carrying on. And remember, practice makes perfect. ER. Regarder, to watch. J'ai regardé, tu as regardé, ils, elles, ont, a regardé, nous avons regardé, vous avez regardé, ils, elles, ont regardé. Now, you can see how that one works. I watched, you watched, he, she, or we in an informal sense watched, we watched, you plural watched, and they watched, or have watched in every situation. Copy this verb down and then conjugate 3 of these other verbs following exactly the same pattern as regarder. Pause the video, complete the activity, and then move on. Now we see IR verbs. Finir, to finish. J'ai fini, tu as fini, ils, elles, ont a fini, nous avons fini, vous avez fini, ils, elles, ont fini. Again, I finished, I have finished, you finished, etc. Copy down finir this time and then conjugate 3 of these other verbs following the same pattern as finir. Pause the recording, complete the activity, and then move on. Finally, RE, répondre, to answer or respond. J'ai répondu, tu as répondu, ils, elles, ont a répondu, nous avons répondu, vous avez répondu, ils, elles, ont répondu. I responded, or I have responded. I answered, or I have answered, etc. You, he and she, we, you, they. Copy this verb down, then conjugate 3 of these other verbs following exactly the same pattern as répondre as before. Pause the video, complete the activity before you move on. Now look up the following irregular verbs in a verb table and see if you can work out the past participle. They're called irregular because they don't follow the same patterns as others. And if they're irregular in one tense, quite often they'll have irregulars in others as well. So it's useful just to be aware of them. If you don't have a dictionary, do an online search for French verb tables and see what you can find out. So pause the recording, complete the activity, and then when you start it up again you'll see all your answers and can check to see how well you've done. Now look up the following irregular verbs in a verb table and see if you can work out the past participle. If you don't have a dictionary, do an online search for French verb tables and see what you can find out. The verbs we'll look at are écrire, to write, faire, to do or to make, dire, to say, être, to be, avoir, to have, boire, to drink, voir, to see, and lire, to read. Pause the video now, see if you can find them out, and then click on afterwards to see how well you've done. Let's see what you've got. Écrit, fait, dit, été, eu, bu, vu, lu. Okay, well done. Let's move on. Now look at the endings of the following verbs and decide on the correct form of avoir. Use the verbs you just copied down to help you, but only if you need to. For example, je, blanc, penser. So we've got to decide which form of avoir goes in. So if we can remember it or we've looked it up, we'll find it's est. J'ai pensé. Pause the video, complete the activity, then self-mark. If you get it wrong, just correct your answer so you can learn from your mistake. Let's see how we've got on. Numéro 1, j'ai pensé. Numéro 2, il a pendu. Numéro 3, vous avez rangé. Numéro 4, ils ont rougi. Numéro 5, elle a réfléchi. Numéro 6, tu as sauté. Numéro 7, nous avons fondu. Numéro 8, elles ont bachoté. Now look up the following verbs in a dictionary. Again, you will need to find the words ending in er, ir, or re, which will give you the infinitive of the verb. That will tell you which of the three endings to add. Use the verbs you've already conjugated to help you, but remember, only if you need to. For example, numéro 1, tu as pendre. Now, when you look up pendre, you'll find pendre, to hang. So therefore, if it ends in re, the correct ending would be a u, and when you translate it, you have hung. Tu as pendu, you have hung. Pause the video, complete the activity, and then self-mark your work. If you get it wrong, correct your answer so you learn from your mistake. Numéro 2. Tu as mangé. You have eaten. Il a répondu. He or she has answered or responded. Nous avons fondu. We have melted or we melted. J'ai joué. I have played or I played. J'ai puni. I have punished or I punished. Tu as choisi. You have chosen. Il, elle a réussi. He or she has succeeded. Vous avez battu. You have beaten. Nous avons grossi. We have gained weight. Vous avez écouté. You have listened. Ils, elles ont copié. They have copied. Let's have one last look at this aide-mémoire for the French perfect tense before we move on to the last activity when it's getting a lot harder because you're going to be doing some open-ended translation. Have a little look at it, pause the video if you need to, and then move on. And see if you can do this last one without referring to anything but a dictionary to find out the infinitive. Now translate the following verbs into French. Remember, choose the correct form of avoir and then conjugate the verb in the steps you've already used. Beware of irregular verbs. For example, numéro 1. She has improved. Elle a amélioré. Pause the video, complete the activity and then self-mark your work. If you get it wrong, correct your answer so you learn from your mistake. Numéro 2. We punished. Nous avons puni. Numéro 3. He did. Il a fait. Numéro 4. I have sold. J'ai vendu. Numéro 5. You, plural, studied. Vous avez étudié. Numéro 6. They started. Ils ont commencé. Numéro 7. You have played. Tu as joué. Numéro 8. I have written. J'ai écrit. Numéro 9. They wasted. Elles ont gaspillé. Now, can you remember which of those were the irregulars? If you got them wrong because you were a bit tricked, make sure you go back and correct them so you learn from your mistake. French, perfect tense. What does this tense mean? Who is doing the verb? Which part of avoir do I need? What do I need to do to the infinitive of the verb? And what is the correct ending that needs to be added? What are the main irregular verbs? Our aims today were to learn how to recognise regular and irregular perfect tense verbs. To learn how to form regular and irregular perfect tense verbs. Très bien. Au revoir.